Now, this is the time to introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Dr. Bhakti Madhava Puri. Dr. B.M. Puri is a founder and serving director of Princeton Bhakti Vedanta Institute. Dr. B.M. Puri earned his undergraduate degree at Rituga University and completed his master and PhD in theoretical chemistry from Georgetown University in 1970. After completing postdoc work with the National Bureau of Standards in Washington, D.C., Dr. Puri moved on to rigorous study and practice of the Bhagavad Vedantic philosophy and Bhakti Yoga. He was one of the 5 founding charter members of the original Bhakti Vedanta Institute in 1976 and became the regional director of the office in Juhu, Mumbai, for a number of years. And after diving deep into the study of the philosophical relation between Bhagavad Vedanta and Hegel's conception realism, Dr. Puri returned to the United States in the 1990s. He opened the Princeton Bhakti Vedanta Institute in 2012. Now, we are very pleased to welcome Dr. Bhakti Madhava Puri Maharaj. Today he is sharing with us his vision, the Cycloptic vision of modern science. Dr. Bhakti Madhava Puri Maharaj, please.
Hi, thank you, Dr. Sumangala Devi. So you have some slides. The topic of our talk today is the cycloptic vision of modern science. I think you may know what a cyclops means, what a cyclops is. Cyclops means a creature with one eye, huh? Monocular vision. So the cycloptic vision of modern science is the topic of our talk today. So life in general is the idea of an embodied activity that produces and preserves itself. Kant called life a natural purpose, or Naturzweck in German, an embodied intentional or deliberate activity. Its end or goal, preservation of itself, is given in its beginning, and thus it is teleological in nature. It is both cause and effect of itself. That is, it is characterized by circular causality. It is not like matter, whose movement is caused by another that is outside of or different from itself. Reason is also purposive activity that has its own necessity to maintain, produce, or continue itself within itself.
Maharaj,
Thought.
There is one small change. The slideshow he has to click because it shows the other menus. So if Krishna Kesava Prabhu can click the slideshow.
What was that, Shanta Maharaj?
Can you click the slideshow so that the menu is going there? It's showing so much of menu on the screen.
It's not showing.
Slides.
It's not showing the full screen of the slideshow.
You just click the slideshow and make it slideshow. On that there is a tab, slideshow.
I was doing screen sharing.
No, slideshow. In that PPT, there is a tab called slideshow.
Yes,
you see?
that's what I'm doing.
Click that. Yes, from beginning. Yeah.
Can you see it now?
Still, it shows the you can stop it again. Share the the slideshow one.
Or you can click the cup in the below. One bar is there, one cup symbol is there. That cup you can.
On our side, it's showing the full slideshow.
No, but you have to select on Zoom. You stop it again, reshare it.
Reshare it, okay.
Yeah, reshare the full screen.
Stop share. Share screen.
No, you select it again. You first open the slideshow, then you select that.
How is that, Maharaj?
Yes, now it is coming good.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Perfect.
Thank you.
So to continue, thought is also an activity that produces or thinks itself. Thus, the ideal world of mind or spirit is observed or manifest or actualized objectively in nature as life, in its particular individuality, as subjectivity in itself. What this means may be understood more simply as a relation between universal and particular. The general or universal idea of life is instantiated in the particular and finite form of life of an organism. Living organisms or organized bodies exhibit the characteristics that determine it according to the universal idea of embodied activity that produces and preserves itself. However, the finite organisms die. They also reproduce. This is not found in the universal idea of life, which we may consider implicitly eternally continuous. The particular under the infinite universal is necessarily not eternally continuous, but it does preserve this eternity explicitly by endlessly reproducing itself. This is the difference and relation of the universal and particular. A species may be considered the singular universal over a multiplicity of specimens under the universal. The particular specimens reproduce themselves to reflect the continuity of the species concept. The unity of the universal and particular may be conceived as a species activity that takes the universal and particular as synthetic activity of the two principles. Reproduction thus becomes the activity that generates as well as preserves the species as such. It is not long.
After.
Huh? Something is missing in the notes here.
What is the last thing?
Mm-hmm.
Living actuality. A species may be considered the singular universal. It is not long after a species opposed to its specimen.
I say it is no longer a species opposed to specimens, but the unified idea of a species process. That is what I wanted to say. So the basic idea is the universal particular relationship. Seems that universal and particular are opposed to one another, one being general, the other being specific. But the idea here is that when we unify the universal and particular as an activity, then both can be incorporated under a single idea, an active idea. The static ideas of universal opposed to particular can be activated, conceived in a fluid form of an exchange or dialectic in which the activity becomes the unity that combines the two into a synthetic form, which we call species activity or species process. So the fluidization, as we may call it, of the static and opposed concepts of universal and particular, synthesized and united as an activity, is a very important method in philosophical thinking that helps to resolve what has become an obstacle in the mind-body or mind-matter duality of modern scientific knowledge, leading to what is known as the hard problem of explaining consciousness from a materialistic perspective. The monocular vision of modern science is unable to admit or acknowledge the role of mind in its empirical exposition and observation of nature. In this way, it has become purely physical or material in its understanding of nature. A little knowledge of philosophy helps to reveal the unconscious naivete of this problematic stance of the modern scientists. It is this neglect or inability of the scientists to recognize the integral role of mind in matter bodies that leads to calling the vision of science monocular or cycloptic. A binocular vision would comprehend the activity of the mind-matter unity and difference that characterizes all of nature as a living actuality or activity. And the word actuality, in the term actuality, the word act is present. It's very important to understand that actuality is not a static thing, but an activity. The Kantian Categories. In order to explain this more clearly, certain fundamental principles of philosophy must be understood. Empiricism, as a philosophical epistemological standpoint, implies that the five senses, hearing, touching, seeing, tasting, smelling, provide the means for acquiring knowledge. The sense organs, ears, skin, eyes, tongue, nose, are the instruments needed for this task. Observation by the senses is one of the fundamental principles of the empirical viewpoint at the base of modern science. Observation is a passive process of sense data recording or reception. In contrast to the observation, a process of judgment is also required. For example, one may see two objects, let us say two spheres, in order to determine that one sphere may be bigger or smaller than the other or equal in size. More than the direct sense detection of them is required by the eye. Comparison is a judgment of the data produced by seeing. Judgment, therefore, works on sense observation to decide the act of comparison. This function or activity of judgment is not found there in the eye. The eye only acts as a receptive organ for collecting sight data. It is something like a photoelectric tube in a robot that detects photons. In a robot, the data from the photoelectric tube would have to be fed into a computer to determine what to do with that data in respect to what the robot will do with it. The point is that sense perception and judgment are two different functions that nonetheless work together in daily observational activity. The act of judgment or comparison is not performed by the senses or instruments of the senses, eye, ear, nose, and so on. They only receive the data of perception. Judgments of comparison and other functions are activities associated with the mind. This shows us that mind is inherently already implicit in what we call observation of nature. Judgment is the essential part of what we call understanding. Judgment implies differentiating or determining that which is immediately given given to us in observation. Kant found that there are 12 categories that understanding automatically applies to the observations whenever, whether we are aware of them or not. These judgments that the senses do not provide, but are provided by mind or understanding. Now, these categories are listed here, are divided into 4 sections: quantity, quality, relation, and modality, or mode. And they refer to unity, plurality, totality. Under each of those divisions, there are 3 further divisions. So we can see that these modes of intelligence or categories of understanding are used widely in modern science. They apply to everything in science, but these are not characteristics of the perceptual organs. These are not characterized by the organs of eyes or ears and so forth. And these are categories that belong to the understanding or mind. And without realizing it, science is utilizing these categories at every aspect of the scientific endeavor without actually giving any recognition to them. So from this list, we can see that science utilizes these important categories in everything it does, but without realizing that it is employing the mind in the construction and constitution of its description of nature. Thus, mind is implicit in all of scientific knowledge, yet this essential element of mind is not recognized in modern science. In fact, they ignorantly and obstinately try to deny its significance altogether. This monocular viewpoint of matter or body only without regard to mind must be corrected in order for science to regain a more complete knowledge of nature and the self in relationship to nature. It will allow the change in perspective that is needed to see ourselves in nature and not necessarily in exploiting, opposed, and domineering presence over nature. Next section is called the relation of thinking to the I. This is one of the main problems confronting the modern scientific viewpoint. The other is also just as fundamental regarding the duality of the individual self and everything else. This usually was historically articulated in the philosophy of Descartes, who claimed, "I think, therefore I am." No doubt thought or thinking occurs to us, but to claim that we are the agents of thinking is something that we can only presume, but not on the basis of any evidence or reasoning. In fact, we have reason to understand that we are not the agents of thought. If we are the agents of thinking, how do we do it? Has anyone been able to explain that or give evidence of that? We acknowledge the fact that we cannot do something if we don't know how to do it. Riding a bicycle is possible when we know how to do it. Driving a car, using a computer, using a particular computer program on a computer are all tasks that we have to learn how to do before we can actually do it. So if we don't know how we are thinking, then how can we claim to be the agents? In fact, we don't know how we lift our arms or how we digest food and so many other things that are being done by the natural intelligence that exists in the body. A quote by Herman Melville in Moby Dick was very significant in this regard. Is Ahab Ahab? Is it I, God, or who that lifts this arm? But if the great sun moves not of itself, but is an errand boy in heaven, nor one single star can revolve, but by some invisible power, how then can this one small heart beat, this one small brain think thoughts, unless God doing that beating is doing that being, does that thinking, does that living, and not I. In order to understand this, we can return back to the ancient wisdom of Plato and Aristotle, especially Aristotle, who explained that thought thinks itself. In Greek, it is called noesis, noesios, noesis. Thinking thinks only thought. Thinking, the activity of thinking, produces itself. Thinking, the activity of the universal, can be conceived as a particular agent, or what Aristotle called theos, producing itself. This is, again, the dynamic concept of activity that unites the universal and the particular. In this case, it is the activity of thinking in which the individual is the instantiation of that activity. This is the absolute theos in Aristotelian philosophy. In this way, we can conceive the absolute ground of everything is founded in thinking, and that extends to all nature, mind and spirit. Anaxagoras, another wisdom philosopher of Greece, also understood that all reality is pervaded and ruled by nous, or reason. Those wisdom teachings, perennial philosophy or eternal truths, have all been revealed and systematized in Hegel's philosophy in the modern period. They can serve as a basis for reconceiving science in a more binocular form that does justice to the true comprehension of nature and self, God and nature, and the healing the subject-object divide. We think that subject and object are forever opposed to each other in the Cartesian dual conception of cognition, and its object, the world. But the object is only what the subject knows it to be. How can there be an opposition of the two? The fallacy of the duality is overcome not by reducing the object to the subject, as in idealism, nor to reducing the subject to the object, as in materialism. The key lies in understanding this unity in difference, that of the living activity of the absolute as the fundamental, as the foundation of all actuality. The duality is not maintained as an opposition, but comprehended in its difference in unity, thus overcoming both duality and reductive monism. What is found in Western philosophy from ancient to modern times is likewise found in the great sages and philosophies of Eastern philosophy of India. In Vedanta, the Upanishads, and the Vedic wisdom. Brahman, as that which grows, is also comprehensible as the absolute thinking that is in everything, or as spirit, which is both formless in order to adapt to all other forms, excuse me, and has infinite form as the universal totality that comprehends and includes all forms, transcendental and immanent. In this way, both Eastern and Western philosophy conclude in the same truth, established and revealing itself in the minds and hearts of all, excuse me, of all those who earnestly seek it with sincerity and openness towards it. In regards of this essay, a prescient remark generally attributed to Nicholas Tesla, although this is not confirmed, states, the day science begins to study non-physical phenomena, it will make more progress in 1 decade than in all the previous centuries of its existence. It's not a matter of belief, not a matter of faith. These things are principles of philosophy that have somehow or other been lost in the modern period. And we become monocular, seeing only matter. In truth, both must be considered, mind and matter, mind and body. Excuse me. And this is what we're trying to explain. Life is a combination of the matter-mind interaction, or dialectic. You can't have one without the other. And once the conceptual architectonic, as it is called, the system of concepts, system of philosophy that underlies and is reflected in all nature, then we will not be able to understand nature as a merely material phenomenon. That is a basic idea of this talk. Thank you very much. We will publish this paper online because it may be a little difficult to follow all the new thoughts that are being presented here. And you can have a chance to read it and study it more carefully.
Is there R. Srinivas there, the moderator, Jagannatham ji?
Yeah, I am here.
Okay, so you can, take care of this question answer, session.
Oh,
I think
yeah.
there are very less, participants. So individually, if they have any question, they can ask.
Yeah, they can ask, I think, yeah. Only 5 questions are there, if I am not wrong, because I don't see the questions on the screen. So probably, yeah. I think there are 5 questions, I think. They can ask.
Okay.
Because I have to click chart to see the questions. Do I have to click chart to see the questions?
They have to unmute and ask if they ask.
Yeah, because, I'm not seeing any questions here on the screen.
Yeah.
There is one
There are some questions.
Sorry?
From Balesh Kumar, there is a question. Hello?
Yeah, Dr. Balesh, yeah.
Yeah, there is a question from him. I can see it on the screen.
Oh, but yeah, I don't see on my screen. I don't know why.
Oh,
Yeah.
shall I read the question?
Yeah, please, I think, yeah. Please go ahead.
So, Bhakti Madhava Puri ji, here there is a question. What is the soul according to Hindu philosophy?
What is the soul? Soul is the particular instantiation of the universal. The universal divinity in its particularized form is called the soul. In other words, it's an infinitesimal aspect of the infinite. Infinite does not exist on its own. That would be to say that the infinite exists on its own, opposed to the finite, would finitize both the infinite. Would finitize the infinite. Nothing can exist outside of the infinite. So the finite must be within the infinite in order to understand the true infinite. It must include itself and the finite. And the finite included in the infinite is called infinitesimal. And that is understood from a conceptual viewpoint as the particularity of the universal. You can't have a universal without a particular. Example, a tree. Tree is a universal idea. But in order to have that universal idea, you must also have specific trees. You have to have a particular tree that you have seen or experienced. And when you compare that tree to all other trees, you get the common idea of tree in all of them. It's not really a common idea, it's the essential idea of what that individual thing is. So there's always a relationship between the universal and particular in order to have either one of them. So the universal idea of God, we may call God, is given in this particular form as the living entity or soul, Atma. Now, soul or Atma is the, you can call transcendental aspect of the individual, embodied individual. It is that, I like to call it the concept that governs the manifest form of a living entity. The soul is the concept that governs the form, the external form of the living entity in nature. When you point to an animal, a dog, let's say, the concept of animal is implicit in every particular animal. Otherwise, you can't tell what it is. When you speak of an apple, you call it a fruit. If we don't know what fruit is, we can't really say what an apple is. Right? Yet the concept of fruit does not exist alongside of all the other instances of fruit, such as apples, grapes, cherries, etc. You can't go to the market and buy something called a fruit. You can only buy instances of fruit. You can't. You ask the storekeeper, "I want fruit," and he says, "Well, here's some apples," and you say, "No, I want fruit, not apples." You can't do that. So the universal and an instance of the universal are both necessary in order to understand either. And the same with the soul and God. The soul is the instance of God. In order to make God meaningful and the soul meaningful. That's a simple answer I can give right now. Further understanding of these things will take some development of philosophy. Is that clear?
There is one more question from Dr. Sumangala.
Yeah, okay. Shall
Can
I?
you see?
Now I'm able to see. Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Dr. Rajendra Bajpai is asking, is there any relevance of semiotics in Vedic philosophy?
Yes. Yeah, the meaning of things, Things have a meaning. A symbol has a meaning. And generally in Vedic philosophy, there's one scholar in Bangalore, actually. His name is Dr. Ashish Dallela. He has developed a whole system of explaining the body in terms of semiotics, using the Vedic paradigm. And that it's a matter of reinterpreting what we mean by matter. Generally, science does not give a clear definition of what matter is. So in Vedic Sankhya philosophy or Vedic philosophy, matter is actually seen as a sign, a symbol. And every symbol has has a realistic or actual presence plus a meaning associated with it or significance. So this can be developed actually in the Vedic paradigm, and Dr. Ashish Dallela has done that. If you look up his name on the internet, you can find a whole well-organized idea about this. So basically, semiotics means the meaning of things. It's not that things have no meaning associated with them. Everything has a meaning associated with it, or a concept. I rather speak in Hegelian terms, that everything has a concept associated with it. Meaning points to the idea of a concept. So semiotics is in a more philosophical terminology, I think explained in terms of the concept philosophy or conceptual realism that we find in Hegel. I hope that makes sense to you.
Yeah. So can we take next question? Yeah. Can you please, this is from Dr. Sumangala. Can you please elaborate more on the subject-object duality?
Yes. You know, the duality between subject and object is completely false. How can subject and object not be connected? We can know, our cognition is able to recognize or comprehend what we call objects. If that is the case, if mind and matter are able to interact or have some relationship, how can they be totally opposed or different from one another? That's the first point. There cannot be any such duality or opposition between subject and object. They are intimately connected. And I like to explain this in terms of one phrase, that the object is only what the subject knows it to be. The object is what the subject knows it to be. We can't speak of an object unless we know what we're talking about when we refer to that object. Therefore, the object is infused with subjectivity or cognition, or cognitional or knowledge. So knowledge, which we may call subjective, and the known, which we may call the objective, are not at all unrelated. They are totally related. So there is an integral or unitary relationship between subject and object that preserves the difference, yet is also somehow that difference is overcome in cognition. That makes sense?
Thank you, Dr. Vyamburi. Thank you.
Okay.
So
There's no question, no more questions.
yeah, no more questions, I think. Yeah.